This is Halloween. This is Halloween. 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 Halloween.
So get a witch's shawl on, a broomstick you can crawl on. Hello everyone, and welcome to day 26 of Terrorthon. Today we are going to be discussing one of the most iconic families in the history of pop culture. You already know the song, it's probably going to be stuck in your head for the rest of today. You're welcome. Today we are talking about the Addams family. You probably know all about them already. They've been around a lot longer than you may realise. But even with that being said, I think they still deserve to have the spotlight shone on them. And who knows, you might learn a thing or two about them that you didn't before. So, for the uninitiated, who are the Addams family? Well, they're an old money family who delight in the macabre, and they're unaware of how they're perceived by the outside world, and they're always doing creepy, spooky, ghouly things. They consist of the father, Gomez, his wife, Morticia, their uncle Fester, the children Wednesday and Pugsley, their sweet old grandmama, and their butler Lurch. Of course, there have been a rotation of other characters included as well, such as Aristotle, the pet octopus, the disembodied hand Thing, the hairy cousin It, the lion Kitty Cat, the flesh-eating plant Cleopatra, and cousin Pubert. They're not exactly what you would call horror, but they're quite clearly influenced by horror and have kept it alive in the mainstream through a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, family-friendly horror. So starting all the way at the very beginning, the Addams family were created by the cartoonist Charles Addams. Could this be one of the very first OCs? Who began work at The New Yorker in 1932. The very first Addams Family cartoon was published in 1938, and they were almost exclusively one-panel gags, so not entire comic strips, just one panel. Charles Addams drew 1,300 cartoons until his death in 1988, and amazingly only 58 of these featured the Addams Family, and these Addams Family cartoons were almost all published in the 1940s and 50s. And then in 1964, the Addams Family came to the screens for the first ever time with a sitcom, which toned down the darker and more evil elements of the original cartoons. And when this show launched, the editor of The New Yorker, William Shawn, prevented any new cartoons appearing in The New Yorker after this point. The original sitcom ran for 2 seasons, and even though it was as short as that, it remained well known for several years, and the character Lurch even got his own song and dance move, which remained popular all throughout the 60s, and even to this day I've seen people performing that dance move.
It's a brand new bag.
And we can't talk about the show without talking about that amazing theme tune which everyone knows. It was written by a man named Vic Mizzy, and it's iconic, even to this day. Played at every Halloween party, as well it should be. The series was dormant for a little bit, but then in 1972 they had a crossover with Scooby-Doo in one of the new Scooby-Doo movies, which was actually just an extended episode of the cartoon. And then they got their very own Hanna-Barbera show in 1973, which received mixed reviews, and not many people talk about it these days. And then sadly the franchise went dormant again, pretty much all throughout the 1980s. But it was revived in 1991 with its own movie, which was commercially successful, but the critic reviews were quite lukewarm. And then they tried again in 1993 with The Addams Family Values. This was the reverse of the previous movie. It didn't do very well financially whatsoever, but critics loved it, and it was considered a cult classic nowadays. In 1992, a new cartoon launched, which is how I personally was introduced to the Addams Family. And what I didn't know at the time, or would have appreciated for that matter, is that it starred the original actor for Gomez, John Astin. This also ran for 2 seasons, just like the original. It was relatively successful at the time, but is rarely discussed nowadays. Then another movie came out, The Addams Family Reunion, which absolutely bombed, and we don't talk about that one. Next up in the history of the Addams Family, a Canadian sitcom of all things was made called The New Addams Family, which also ran for 2 seasons, what a surprise, from 1998 till 1999. And then we got, complete with Wednesday Addams' bulging forehead, an animated movie released in 2019, which made almost double its budget back in profits. But it was poorly reviewed, much like the 2021 movie that followed. It was released during COVID, so it never really stood a chance. It was far less successful in every respect. And most recently, which is what you've probably heard of, was Wednesday, with the Netflix show which debuted last year in 2022, with some episodes directed by Tim Burton. Obviously, he's always into this gothic stuff and his name sells. It's currently the second most watched English language Netflix series, and that record was reached within 3 weeks of the show being released, and it's still running today, so you'll probably get a new season next year. And all of that we've just discussed is only the Addams Family on the screen. There's so much other stuff, like a musical, a very successful musical, that ran for 722 performances. There were best-selling novelizations of the 60s sitcom, there have been 10 video games in the Addams Family, a pinball machine, and they're still to this day considered a strong inspiration for goth culture. Like, a lot of people want to look like Morticia or Gomez, even to this day, and they've been recently called as iconic a family as the Kennedys. So it just goes to show, starting all the way back in the 30s, they're still just as popular as ever. I mean, Wednesday alone speaks for itself. So, as I say, they have a very important place in horror culture. Even though it wasn't exactly horror, it still kept horror alive and introduced children to horror. And it's just a cultural cornerstone which deserves every bit of the attention it continues to receive. See you tomorrow.